everyone. Welcome back to Cincinnati Zoo Tales. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Mark. Thank you to all you listeners for tuning in to another episode of Zoo Tales. Jenna, we're being joined by a conservationist who's working out in the Pacific Northwest right now. She just joined us for our Barrows Conservation Series. It is Jane Bacchieri, and Jane is the Executive Director of the Elakha Alliance, working to reestablish sea otters out west. So we know you're very busy. Thank you for joining us today while you're on your visit.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to talk to your audience today.
Did you have a good time talking at the Barrows Lecture last night?
It was really fun. The energy in the room was so great, and people had wonderful questions, and I was kind of nervous about this big lecture, and it was just such, I don't know, the energy in the room was great. I had an excellent time.
Awesome.
So.
We definitely recommend people looking at the zoo's website and signing up for our Barrows Lectures, where you can hear from conservationists from all over the world. And we want to hear about you today and your story and the Elakha Alliance and like everything you're doing. But tell us a little bit about your background. How did you become a conservationist? A lot of the people listening are really interested in conservation, or they might be college students that are, considering all of their options when it comes to working with animals or conservation or sustainability. So we like to hear about people's backgrounds and kind of how you get into this sort of job.
Not a direct route.
I don't think,
It's a very winding path. Well, I got a degree in biology, and I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I went to work for a vet for a couple of years, and then I realized, no, I don't want to be a veterinarian. I loved animals, but the work itself was not what I wanted to do. And I really enjoyed a few classes I'd taken in environmental science. So I looked into graduate programs and went to Duke University, and I got a degree in environmental management. And when I was there, I had the opportunity to work at the Duke Marine Lab. I had a couple fellowships. Cool. And first of all, if you have the opportunity to work at a field station, it's just the best experience ever. And it just really grew to love the marine environment in North Carolina. And so I did my master's degree on coastal non-point source pollution, so I was looking at water quality also. And when I finished up school, I came out to Oregon, and I was looking for a job and ended up working down on the south coast of Oregon in a really small city town called Coos Bay. Actually, the fishing village is called Charleston, working for South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve. And so I had the opportunity to work on estuarine research and environmental education and guided field trips and things like that. So it was really awesome. And then I decided I need to go to Peace Corps for a couple of years. So went overseas for a couple of years. Wow. I got to work on environmental issues in the Kingdom of Tonga, and then came back to Oregon and worked for the National Park Service for a couple of years, working on a river management plan at Katmai National Park. And then finally said, I kind of really want to be back in Oregon. Stayed for a while. And I worked for the Oregon Coastal Management Program, and then my career sort of progressed more into policy, working for the governor as a natural resources policy advisor, and then eventually leading a team at the city of Portland doing watershed restoration work. So it, like I said, not direct. It was one of those like, oh, this looks interesting, and might as well apply for it. And I was like, oh, that's great. So lots of learning curves along the way, but also it was really, I've really loved the opportunities I've had. And so after 11 years with the city, I decided I kind of wanted to try one more thing, and I wasn't sure what it was. And my former boss with the state of Oregon heard that I was looking to do something new and different, and said, "Hey, I've got this nonprofit. It's relatively new. We're hiring our first executive director. Do you want to apply for the job?" And so I did.
That's wow. Those are a lot of different
yes.
jobs. They're
I know.
Related, but not really related. And all I could think while you were saying all that is, how did you know how to do each of those? That's a lot of different skills. And
yeah, I think people think that you need to know how to do the job before you get a job, and there's definitely skill sets that you actually have to have for certain jobs. And then there's so much learning that happens on the job. I have to say I've been very fortunate to have people in my professional life that have seen something in me that I haven't always seen in myself, and mentors, and I think that has made a big difference because I've been they saw something and thought, we think you're going to be good at this. We're going to give you the chance. And just not letting the fact that you're not sure if you can do the job stop you from at least trying to get the job. And then if things don't work out, it's not a failure. It's just an acceptance that, okay, maybe it's not the good fit, or maybe I don't like doing this. I think that we can't be afraid to fail as we progress in our career, or we're not going to go anywhere. And, some people really want to have different experiences while you're working. I sort of feel like if I have to spend at least 40 hours a week working, and it's usually often much more, but you work most of your life. And it's like, it doesn't have to be your ultimate passion, but I feel like you have to be curious and you have to be at least interested and engaged in what you're doing. So that's where I feel like I've had some amazing opportunities.
I think that's great advice, and definitely the passion helps. Yeah, you do have to work a lot of your life. It's kind of wild when you look back and think about it.
Yeah.
I am curious, before we get into your current position that you're in, you've held so many, like Jenna just mentioned, so many different jobs, so many different places that you've worked. It's incredible. Do you have like a favorite place or a favorite time where you were like, that was a really special moment when I was working and taking kids on groups or educating, or I actually prefer being behind the scenes more? Did you have any special memories that hold a place in your heart?
I mean, Alaska's amazing. It's not always an easy place to live, but I did get to have some diverse experiences there. I mean, seeing bears off my front porch and things like that. But weirdly, I mean, I sound like such a bureaucrat right now, but working in the governor's office was perhaps one of the most satisfying jobs I ever had.
Interesting.
And I didn't realize how much I kind of liked getting into policy. And what I think why it was very rewarding for me was I understood the science, and I felt like I could bridge the science to the policy. And so, and working for a governor means that people listen to you, which I was like, oh, wow, what a concept, And I got to work with a variety of different state natural resources agencies working on natural resources issues. So I got to convene people. And so I felt like I had the ability to bring people together to figuring out solutions. And that was weirdly empowering. I mean, I didn't have to be in charge, but I liked being able to work with different people towards some sort of common goal and common solution. And, the government can be very bureaucratic, can move really slowly. And it wasn't like we moved at a rapid pace, but I did feel like we made progress, and I was part of affecting some of that change. So that was, I mean, I'm like, oh yeah, I get to work in Alaska, but no, I really liked working in state government. So no, but I think that it was surprisingly very rewarding.
That's really interesting to me, because I'm always really grateful when I think about it, the people who are willing to work in the government and work on these policies, because it wouldn't be this instant reward, right? Like you said, it doesn't move quickly.
No.
I also it's not how my brain works. I feel like I wouldn't be able to write a policy, but at the same time, I love like getting together and brainstorming and trying to figure out a solution with people. That's like one of my favorite things. Just like, even if it's a terrible idea, let's just like say it out loud right now and come to like the right answer. So that's I wouldn't have guessed you would have said working in the government was your favorite. But I mean, that's awesome.
It's hard to compare. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Right.
Sure.
But I mean, I think people often think like, oh my gosh, you had the opportunity to, work with animals. Oh my gosh, what could top that? But you just have to put it in context and think about, okay, how am I being effective? Do I feel like I'm making a difference?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can actually do that in office, even though it feels really odd to say that.
No, I love that, because there's so many opportunities to help be a conservationist or work with animals or there's so many opportunities, and I love that there are people willing to do each and every one of them, and to hear that there's probably a reason why people enjoy every different version of helping. So we all just want to make a difference. That's why we want to do the podcast, so we can help make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very admirable for sure. So I'm curious, how did Elakha go about getting started then? And then what is the mission? Like, what is the goal of the Alliance?
Sure. So the Elakha Alliance, it's a Oregon-based nonprofit 501c3. It was incorporated, so formally organized in 2018. But the idea of the Elakha Alliance, it was more informally organized over 25 years ago by David Hatch. He was a member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and he was building a boat with his son Peter, and he was looking for a name for this boat, and he came upon the word Elakha in a dictionary of indigenous words and names, and it means sea otter in the Chinook jargon language. So this was a language that was used among traders and indigenous peoples for the purposes of trading along the Columbia River. And so we thought, first of all, great name, but secondly, like, okay, if we have, there's at least 6 words for sea otter in different indigenous languages that are found among tribal people in Oregon. And he's like, if we've got names for sea otters and we've got places in Oregon, Otter Point, Otter Rock, that are named for sea otters, it means they were here, and it means that they had some significance to tribal people. First of all, why aren't they here now? And secondly, should we be thinking about returning them? And so this was his own sort of personal quest, but he talked to some different people, sort of convened informally a group that he referred to as the Elakha Alliance. And actually he even had a logo made, which is our logo today. Wow. One of the people who talked with was Bob Bailey. So Bob was my former boss when I worked at the Oregon Coastal Management Program. He was the manager of it. And at the time, he convened the Oregon Ocean Policy Committee, OPAC. And so Dave had reached out to Bob and said, hey, is this something OPAC would consider taking on as, it's something that they would look into recommending for the Oregon coast. And at the time, OPAC was very involved in a contentious issue, that being the designation of marine reserves off the coast of Oregon. Many of the coastal communities, many of the fishermen hated the idea. They felt like this was going to restrict their access to their livelihood, and it was just going to be, their path to going out of business. And so it was extremely contentious. And so Bob said, I don't think OPAC really has bandwidth right now to deal with another issue. Interesting idea. So Bob retired, I think, around 2014, and he started thinking about the sea otter thing again. And so he reached out to contact Dave and found out that he had unexpectedly died. And so Bob basically convened the folks that Dave had been talking to and said, let's talk more about this. And they decided that, yes, we think this should be an organization that is focused on sea otter reintroduction. And so, like I said, they incorporated, we received our 501c3 status in 2020. And then 2020 happened.
Yeah.
So COVID happened, and I do think that this was... it gave the organization, a young organization, some time and space to kind of get its footing and get some grants. And so they had already gotten a grant to develop a strategic plan, so put together the roadmap, or at least a blueprint for what work and how they were going to do it. And then they got enough money in grants during COVID to hire Chanel Hasten, who is our Director of Outreach and Community Relations. So she came on board as our first employee, first as a contractor, and then as an employee in January 2022. And then I came on board as the first Executive Director in July 2022. So haven't even been at the organization 4 years, but we're now, so it was me and Chanel, and then we went, add another person, a coastal community coordinator, Kyle Motley, in 2023, and Katie Russell had been on our board, came on board as a development and operations director last year, and I'm just in the process of bringing on my 5th employee on Monday. We are hiring a reintroduction planning manager to be a project manager for a grant that the Sleds tribe received to develop a management plan. So that's us. We're 5. Yeah.
But you're growing, right? You're growing.
Yeah, I mean, growing, but I think that we're not necessarily looking for expansion. I mean, it's more like, okay, what are the needs, and do we have the resources to bring on somebody to do that work? And it's a little bit of a balancing act, because when I bring on people, I want to make sure that we've got the capacity to support them. But also, there's a lot of work out there. So if there's absolute needs that we realize the Elakha Alliance is best suited to lead or to be a part of, then we want to make sure we can bring on some staffing, whether it's contract or staff, to be able to work on that issue. So I'm kind of constantly thinking about that, making sure that and just finding the pace that we're able to do work. I mean, part of it is, a lot of it's out of our control. I mean, we're kind of doing the work to build the support and filling information and science gaps. And as we do that, we're also trying to make sure that decision makers, those are, both tribal and agency folks and elected leadership, understand the momentum that we have, the support, and the decision points that they may need to be engaged in. And so, anyway, I'll stop right there for now because you probably have a few more questions so I can talk more. So we're not a running monologue.
Well, you mentioned that sea otters are not found off the coast of Oregon anymore. And you said, we want to find out why.
Yeah.
And can you tell everyone why?
Mm-hmm. So sea otters have been missing from the Oregon coast for over 100 years, and that was a result of the maritime fur trade. And so prior to the 18th century, there were probably about 300,000 sea otters globally. There was a contiguous population that ranged from northern Japan, north to Russia, across to Alaska, and then down the west coast of North America, all the way down to Baja. So and, there were indigenous people that lived in balance with those sea otters for thousands of generations. So, and then with exploration came fur trade. And so the maritime fur trade in North America started around 1740. And within 150 years, they had decimated the global population of sea otters down to about 1% of that original population.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. So there were only a handful of remnant populations left in very remote and rugged areas that the hunters couldn't get to. And so all the sea otters today are now descendants of those remnant populations. And so there's still a few sea otters in northern Japan. We don't really know how many are in Russia, but I don't think it's that many. And then the Aleutian Islands and Prince William Sound was where northern sea otters had remnant populations. And then in the 1930s, they discovered that there was another small population that was left off the Big Sur coast. And so in Oregon, they were gone, and so because there have been both natural expansions of those remnant populations and translocations, so looking at where you've got recovering sea otters and where sea otters used to exist and you want a recovering population, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, there were planned translocation efforts. And the driver behind these was that the U.S. Atomic Nuclear Commission wanted to do testing of nuclear weapons in the Aleutian Islands. And so wildlife biologists that were watching that sea otter population starting to recover were extremely concerned that they were just going to lose it all. And so they planned some translocations to Southeast Alaska, where they were gone, to Washington, and to Oregon. And the translocation efforts in Alaska and Washington were successful, and the one in Oregon was not. And so that's
Do you know why?
Yeah, there's a lot of, we don't know exactly why. Some of the reasons that people think it wasn't successful was because they think that it was a well-planned translocation effort, but sometimes the best laid plans don't exactly work out. And the weather when the animals were released actually got really bad. It can get very windy on the Oregon coast in the afternoons in the summer, and that's exactly what happened. And they had them in holding pens, and they were planning on keeping them there to acclimatize them for a couple days, and they just couldn't do that. The pens were getting rocked around, and the animals, were getting, it was like a roller coaster for them, so they just release the animals. Like, we're not going to hold these in a pen because it's dangerous for the animals. And so that could have resulted in the animals, some level of mortality. The otters also have a very strong site fidelity instinct, so they want to go back to where they came from. So they may have started swimming north. I like to think they kind of met up with the otters in Washington, maybe decide to hang there. So they're not quite sure. They weren't tagged. Tagging otters is really difficult because they have to groom their fur constantly, so you can't put a tag anywhere that would interrupt the grooming behavior. And so for visual surveys down in Elkhorn Slough, California, they have managed to do flipper tags, and so that's fine if you're doing shoreline monitoring, but it's not. In Oregon, that would be tough. The otters would be too far offshore to really be able to track them. So it was the monitoring that was done was really it was shoreline, and it was sort of a it was done annually, but it wasn't super robust. But they did see otters. They saw otters with pups until 1981, and they weren't seeing any more otters anymore. So over the course of 10 years, they just disappeared.
Wow.
So.
We've talked to a lot of different conservationists on the show. Luckily, we've been lucky to have the opportunity, and something that's a common thread no matter where you're doing conservation across the world is you need community buy-in, you need community support. So what is, in Oregon, what does the local community feel like about these reintroduction efforts? Are they excited? Are they a little nervous about it? I'm sure there's probably varying beliefs depending on who you talk to, but what's the level of community support right now?
Yeah, I think it depends on the groups that you're talking with. I mean, overall, when we do tabling and presentations, I have to say overwhelmingly, first of all, a lot of people, if not most people, don't know that we don't have otters in Oregon. They've seen them at the Oregon Zoo, the Oregon Coast Aquarium, or maybe down in Monterey, and they just assume, of course, we've got sea otters in Oregon. So that's sort of sometimes the starting point. And then often it's like, well, oh my gosh, we should bring them back. We're like, yes, exactly.
Yes, we should.
But I mean, and often though, sometimes you're talking to true believers too when you do those types of events. Kyle, a person that's based on in Coos Bay, he was hired with the explicit direction that you need to go out and meet people. He lives in Coos Bay. He's part of the community, but we need to be talking to fishermen and others that are in ocean-related businesses, and just kind of start getting the feel for what where they're at with this. And in particular, after the Marine Reserve experience in Oregon, which went on for a long time, and we're fortunate in the timing of what we're trying to do is Marine Reserves have been running for over 10 years, and the world didn't come to an end, the sky didn't fall, and they're working as intended, and all those folks that were against them, don't have any complaints. It's all good. The fishermen are still fishing, and so, but that said, the most economically important fishery in Oregon is the Dungeness crab fishery. And sea otters are generalists in the sense that they eat over 100 different species of marine invertebrates. But everything from urchins to crabs to clams to scallops to sea cucumbers. I mean, they're not that picky, and their dietary preferences, there's all sorts of research about that. But I mean, there's a range of different prey items that they'll eat. But of course, Dungeness crab are among them. And I think for the crabbers who feel like, especially in many natural resources industries in Oregon, I think over the past 40 years, a lot of those industries just feel like they've been regulated out of business. And so many in the crab fishery feel that way also. And they feel like this is one more thing that they're concerned about, and that may put them out of business. And so part of it is just, meeting them where they're at, just having a conversation. Kyle is not trying to change hearts and minds. He's just trying to be a resource and to make sure that they're aware of what we're trying to do, the work that we're doing. We don't want to, and providing opportunities for them to share their perspectives, for us to learn from them. The more we can learn about what their concerns or perspectives might be, the better we are in informing our efforts for where CRs might be reintroduced or where they shouldn't be reintroduced. And so I think it's just part of making sure that they're not seen as an aside, they're seen as part of the conversation. And I think the Elakha Alliance is well positioned to have those conversations, because while we are an advocate for CR reintroduction, we know no decision's been made, and we're just trying to make sure that the decision making is made in a way that the community does have the opportunity to be heard and to be a part of it, and also to have a sense of ownership around this. I mean, and at the end of the day, maybe not all the crab fishermen will be really thrilled about it, but if we are at a point where we don't have organized opposition and they feel confident that that if there are impacts from a sea otter reintroduction, that there's avenues for addressing those. That we're not just saying, okay, here's the otters, oh, we'll deal with that, whatever. That there's some understanding of what might be addressed if there's impacts. So
it's really interesting. It's so comparable to wolves being reintroduced and the impacts it has on ranchers, and it all goes back to trying to work together as a community and helping everyone understand and have a say, and being heard is really important to a lot of people. And I also, I think it's interesting that you're working every day, but you currently, it's not like on a daily basis you're going out and putting otters out onto the Oregon coast.
Unfortunately.
So, not yet.
Like, I'm interested to hear, aside from the community aspect, like, what is your job, your day-to-day look like? What is going on a daily basis for you and your team?
Well, for me, it's a lot of Zoom. The team gets to do a few more fun things. So our strategic plan has 3 strategic initiatives. I mean, the first one, and from the very beginning, the folks that were talking about this is like, we want to make sure that what we do is grounded in science. We want to get the science right. And so the first thing that they did before they hired any staff was they got some funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop a feasibility study to make sure that, okay, we understand what the current state of the Oregon coast is regarding habitat, regarding resources, prey availability, and is this actually biologically, ecologically feasible? Mm-hmm. So, and the folks that authored that report include Dr. Tim Tinker, who has been a sea otter, well, he's an ecologist, but he's a modeler. He's working on sea otters his entire career. Dr. Jim Estes, who recently passed away, but he is the researcher that up in Alaska kind of basically sea otters are the textbook example of a keystone species, and it's his research that basically demonstrated that. And so he's one of the authors, Dr. Sean Larson, who is up at the Seattle Aquarium working on otters. So, I mean, we had some serious expertise behind our report. So that was amazing. And so getting the science right, but the report, along with a subsequent U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service feasibility assessment, which are the kind of complementary companion documents, identified, like, we know that ecologically this is a good thing and it's feasible, but there's some socioeconomic questions that need to be, first of all, defined, because it really depends on where you might reintroduce the otters, and then addressed. And so it was saying that it's not an absolute done deal when you think about the information that we need before we do this. So that's one thing that we're working on. We are not necessarily we're not the scientists doing the research, so we basically work to figure out, okay, who's doing what research, or who might be able to do what research? Do they have the resources? Is there a way that the Elakha Alliance can get some funding? So, for example, one study that we funded was sharks are a threat because they bite sea otters. They don't eat them because they take a bite and there's no blubber here. We don't like this, but furry mess. But that's lethal. And down in California, there's been increased mortality from shark bites. And so before we reintroduce otters in Oregon, we kind of wanted to see, well, how high is that risk? What's going on with the shark populations? Is there something unusual happening in Oregon, or areas where there's high concentrations that we should be aware of? So we did a shark tagging study working with researchers at Oregon State University. So building on what they've been doing in California. So that's the type of thing. Well, we found a grant and at least funded 1 year of that, but at least kind of gave us some baseline. Like, okay, at least for 1 year, they realized that there's nothing super unusual happening with shark activity off the coast of Oregon. So those are the types of things that we'll work on.
That's so interesting. You're studying other things to see how it would make sense. And I think that's very important and smart, and something that wouldn't have necessarily crossed my mind. Like, but if it didn't work with the first reintroduction, I forget which year you said that was.
1970s.
Yeah, there's a lot to look into. Like, is it the right place? But if they lived there before, it feels like, obviously, yes, but it's smart to look into. And then you mentioned otters being a keystone species. Can you explain that to our listeners, what that is and why it's so important? And
Sure. A keystone species was a term that was coined to describe a species, often it's an apex predator, but not always, that has a disproportionate impact on the ecosystem in which it lives. So if you remove that species, there's a trophic cascade that happens with all the other species, or many of the other species that live within that environment. So for sea otters, if sea otters eat a variety of prey, including urchins. If you take sea otters out of the equation, what Jim Estes and others have observed was the areas where they were doing surveys up in Alaska, off of islands where there are sea otters, there was a very robust and diverse and productive kelp forest. And islands where there were no sea otters, it was noticeably different. The lack of kelp, lack of diversity, and in many cases, many more sea urchins than you would normally see in a kelp habitat. And so that's the impact. And then what happens is that sea urchins are grazers of kelp. And when there's a lot of them, they can pretty much mow down a kelp forest. And so you end up with an ecosystem that has lost so much productivity, and its ability to rebound from that can take a really long time.
So it kind of leaves it with like a barren ecosystem, essentially.
Yes, and they call these areas where there's a lot of sea urchins urchin barrens.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's photos of benthic habitats where it's like all purple sea urchins. It's kind of shocking. Yeah.
Do you know off the top of your head a lot of species that depend on kelp forests?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so otters don't eat kelp. You know, sometimes people say, "Oh, there's no kelp, you can't have an otter." It's like, well, otters also live in estuaries. I mean, but we often say that kelp need sea otters more than sea otters need kelp. But kelp, they're sort of a proxy for prey availability. And if you've seen photos or even had a fabulous opportunity to dive in a kelp forest, I mean, there's a vertical diversity. So you've got the big kelp that you see all the time, the bull kelp or the giant kelp, but you also have smaller seaweeds, sometimes referred to as kelp also. And you've got sessile invertebrates, urchins. They do move, but they're not moving anywhere really fast. You've got chitons, you've got mussels, I mean, depending on where you are in the intertidal zone. And then you've got finfish. And so kelp forests are really important habitat for both nursery and for protection from predators for all sorts of different species. And so the fishermen in Oregon know that, kelp forests are really important, and they know the impact that having a predator, or a duplicity of predators on things like urchins are really important, and that some of the species they depend on, like rockfish, need really intact and productive kelp habitats to live in. And so, it's something that it's not just one species; it's the whole food web that really does depend on kelp. I mean, even after it dies, it gets washed up on shore, and seabirds will eat it. I mean, it's just part of the entire coastal marine ecosystem.
I like to try and explain things in a way that people can imagine since they're listening to us right now, and I just feel like it's a habitat loss, essentially. You wouldn't notice it, though, from above the water, so you may not recognize it or think of kelp forests being essentially cut down because they are they're being eaten by these sea urchins the sea urchins are reproducing like crazy and no longer have a predator around, so the sea otters are very important for that, and it's an interesting way of habitat loss. It's not necessarily humans coming and cutting the trees down, but
right.
there are issues that are
So
similar.
urchins coming down. Yeah. So but you're asking what else do we do? So a really big piece of what we do right now is the outreach and community engagement work, and so that is a broad spectrum of different types of things. And we all do it in some ways. Like, I'm here giving a lecture, but Chanel Hasten, who is our Director of Outreach and Community Relations, she does all over social media. She is a great interpreter, and she's got a great presence. I love to have her on camera and not me. She's really good at it. And she does school programs. I mean, she does everything from, programs at the zoo, organizing our Sea Otter Awareness Week with other partners working on sea otters. She is pretty much single-handedly organizes our biggest fundraiser of the year, the Oregon Otter Beer Fest, which is this Saturday. It's very fun, and it's also a great outreach event, and we bring other ocean partners in, and they table and stuff, so it's educational and fun and good beer. And so she does a variety of different things. She does our monthly newsletter, which is email newsletter, so podcasts, webinars, so she runs the gamut. And then Kyle, who's based in Coos Bay, does a lot more of that one-on-one engagement, but also community programs. And he goes into schools too, and he does summer camps and meets with fishermen. And so I sort of say, like, okay, your job is to go have beer with fishermen. That's what you get to do. And he's a big surfer too, so he knows lots of people in the community, just connecting with them through being surfers. And so I also joke, I'm like, well, next time I hire somebody on the coast, one of the prerequisites, they have to be a surfer. So anyway, yeah. And then Katie, because she's located in Eugene, she does a lot of the Mid-Valley and Mid-Coast stuff also, in addition to helping with a lot of the fundraising that we do.
Amazing. I know you're a little bit tight on time. We don't want to take too much of your time. Okay. Is there anything else really important that you want to share with everyone listening about the Elakha Alliance or sea otters in general?
So, I mean, I think one of the questions people have is why, if Oregon hasn't had sea otters for over 100 years, why do we need to bring them back now? And I think the ocean is changing and not in ways that are good. And over the past 10 years, there's been ocean warming events like the blob, the big heat wave that we had starting in 2013. There's been an overpopulation of urchins, and that's both been because they think that the ocean warming conditions basically precipitated a big spawning of them, but also because they also think the ocean warming conditions may have started the sea star wasting disease that started around 2014 on the entire West Coast. And it affected all species of sea stars in different ways, but the Pycnopodia, which are the sunflower sea stars, and they grow really big. And they are a predator of urchins also. So when you take a place like Oregon, where we already don't have sea otters, and then you have sea star wasting disease, remove almost all of the Pycnopodia, you've got no predators left for grazers like sea urchins. And so it makes it more urgent. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say my takeaway is we need... it's not that sea otters are going to be the sole solution. We need to be using every tool in our toolbox to address the threats to our ocean environment and make it more resilient. And so I think at the end of the day, sea otters are part of that long-term solution, restoring Pycnopodia, restoring kelp forests, making sure we can do whatever we can to alleviate both the impacts from climate change and also what's causing climate change. Kelp and eelgrass and estuaries are also have the ability to sequester carbon. So we need a balanced ocean environment, not just for fisheries and not just for those ecosystems, but just for our ability to be able to live on this earth too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned there is some urgency to try and alleviate all the pressure from the urchins, but at the same time, like you mentioned, this is a bureaucratic issue. Nothing is moving super fast. Is there any timeline that you guys have? You have a goal in mind? We really want to get otters by 2028 or something like that.
Well, so there's all sorts of other partners working on things like kelp restoration and Pycnopodia restoration, and that's all great. We support all that work. Our work is probably going to take a bit longer because the decision makers and the bureaucracy involved. We are hoping with this America the Beautiful grant that there will be a tribally informed reintroduction plan done by the end of the grant, so that's in 3 years. So end of 2028, I can count. And then that plan will be the blueprint for what actions need to be taken next. We're also hoping by that time that there'll be some clarity on who is going to lead this. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has authority over sea otters, and so these other translocations that have been done, the most recent one being southern sea otters moved from the Central Coast to the Channel Islands in the late 80s, was led by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we definitely see them as partners, but because there's no driver for reintroduction in Oregon, because we don't have otters. So in California, they have southern sea otters. They're listed as threatened, so there's a recovery plan. So they have a bit of a driver and a driver for getting federal funding. We don't have that in Oregon. And so we're also looking to see if there's a tribe, a coalition of coastal tribes that want to take a lead on that, and or the state of Oregon. And so trying to figure out what those pathways might be and what is needed to make sure that those are viable pathways. And I use the Yurok tribe's condor reintroduction in Northern California as sort of a model. I mean, that would usually be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They did work with the service, but the tribe led it. And it probably wouldn't have happened if they had not led it, or it would have taken a really, really, really long time. And similarly, in Colorado, the state of Colorado had a ballot measure, and they led a recent wolf reintroduction there in 2023. And I know there's a lot of controversy behind that, but I think that we can look at other pathways to see, and we still see the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a great partner, and we're not trying to work around them. And if they have the ability and to lead this, we're like, we'll do anything we can to support you, but we also want to just see what the other options might be. So, so for the
attack.
So the multiple, ultimately, I would love to see a reintroduction in the water within 10 years. That's my personal goal. And I think we just kind of need to keep the momentum going, and if it happens sooner than that, that's even better. But I mean, I also want to be realistic with people. These take a long time, and I'd say, some aspects of government are working slower now than normal. So, and so you can't control some of that. But I think one of the things the Elakha Alliance can do is just making sure that we keep on connecting with people that have different roles in this. And it kind of keeps some pressure on them for keeping this moving forward. And I think building that public support. I mean, politicians don't like to make decisions, and I'm sorry, they're all, I respect them all, but decision making, it takes a long time, and sometimes they really need to know that they've got the support of their voters, the public, if they're going to be taking a position on something. So.
Well, I really appreciate all of the work you're doing, and applaud anyone who's willing to work on a project where you won't necessarily see, I mean, you're making progress and you're seeing goals hit, but you aren't seeing that end goal of sea otters back on the Oregon coast for maybe 5-10 years. And it's hard not to give up hope, but we have to keep it. So I'm really glad that we have people like you doing that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes.
So you can help us end this episode with telling us what can I do? I don't live on the Oregon coast, but somebody listening might. Or what can I do to be a better steward of the earth in general? Something you might do at home yourself, or anything you can share with our listeners that's tangible they could do.
I mean, so if it's for sea otters, I think anything that you can do if you're buying seafood, making sure that you're buying sustainable seafood, if you have the opportunity to know where it comes from, if it's from the U.S., most of the seafood that is sold in the United States comes from outside the United States, which is just crazy. So just prioritizing buying U.S. seafood, because that supports coastal communities, it supports our fisheries. And our fisheries feel supported, then they don't approach issues like sea otter reintroduction from a place of fear. And from a place of going out of business. So that would be something that I think we can all do. And, even in your local supermarket, the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a seafood watch that they keep up to date with what are the most sustainable sources of seafood. So I think that's a really good thing to do. And just, this impacts sea otters if you live on the coast, but it impacts all wildlife if you live not on the coast. It's just, thinking about your practices in your home. I used to work for a stormwater and sewer agency in the city of Portland, and so we are really concerned about stormwater runoff and the pollutants it carries, and so just thinking about what you're putting down your sink and what's on your yard and managing your runoff in a way so you don't have pollutants going into your local creeks, which go into rivers, which eventually go into oceans. So that's my couple things.
I love it. Yeah, and those are things that anyone can do. And it's sometimes hard to know, like, where should I pour this extra chemical, or what should I do with these old medications? And I think it's probably easy enough to Google these days. But it is that extra step that you can take that will make a difference, especially if all of us are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's fantastic advice. Before we go, do you have anywhere that listeners could visit if they want to learn more about
yes, we wanted to hear about your social media.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Our website.
Yeah.
So our website is www.Elakha Alliance, ELAKHA Alliance.org, or if you just Google Sea Otters Oregon, we will pop up. and on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's only once a month. It's a great source of information, not just with the Elakha Alliance, but related issues. So we like to promote other things that are happening in the ocean environment and among our partners. And then I'm sure there'll be some things about the Cincinnati Zoo after my visit here. So, and then we have a really strong presence on Instagram, and the link is on our website, and Facebook and LinkedIn, and I think X too. I don't do X, so I'm not a good promoter for some of the social media because I don't engage with that much. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram are probably our big ones. Yeah,
great.
So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here and all of the work that you're doing in your team, and for sharing everything with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And to all you listeners, be sure to Google Elakha Alliance, check them out online, and thank you for listening to today's episode. Take care.
Have a good one.